All right, hello everybody. This is Frank Morano. Oh, can't get this microphone to be quiet. Actually, let me turn this off. All right, that's better. All right, so I know what you're thinking. That you usually see me do these Facebook Live videos on Saturday in order to promote Sunday's show, but it is Halloween, and I wanted to showcase this spooky microphone, which my mother was kind enough to get me, and it's really only good once a year. So I figured we might as well use it today. Now. All right, now as I was saying, so today's an interesting day. Happy Halloween, everybody. Hopefully you are going to be enjoying some candy. We are a Halloween celebrating household, so we're going to be giving candy away to all the trick-or-treaters that come. We hope we get a lot of trick-or-treaters so that I don't have to eat all this candy. Now, very quickly, a huge news story, the front page of the New York Post, the New York Times, most of the major papers today, certainly all the New England area papers, has to do with the death, the murder, more accurately, of James Whitey Bulger. Now, Whitey Bulger is an interesting guy for a whole bunch of reasons. The fact that he led this massive organized crime ring in Boston for so many years, the Winter Hill Gang, makes him an interesting character. The fact that he was able to evade detection and capture by the FBI for so many years, in spite of being number one or number two on the FBI's most wanted list, is interesting. The fact that his brother, while James Whitey Bulger was heading this massive criminal enterprise in Massachusetts, the fact that his brother was at the same time the president of the Massachusetts State Senate, and then went on to become the president of one of the big universities out there in Massachusetts, is so interesting. Now, there have been a lot of portrayals of Whitey Bulger and Whitey Bulger type characters in films and television shows over the years. They did the show The Brotherhood. I think that was a Showtime show about basically on Whitey Bulger and his brother. Then they did the Jack Nicholson film, The Departed, where the Jack Nicholson character, in The Departed, Frank Costello, is based on James Whitey Bulger. Then they did the movie with Johnny Depp, Black Mass, all about Whitey Bulger. James Woods did a series of episodes on Ray Donovan where he plays a Whitey Bulger type character. So, the reason I'm so eager to talk about Whitey Bulger, and aside from having an excuse to use my spooky microphone, is because, to me, Whitey Bulger represents a pretty good indication of exactly what's wrong with the federal government. I don't know, and so many of its agencies. I don't know whether it's incompetence or malicious intent or both. But if you look at the criminal career of Whitey Bulger, it is impossible to look at it without objectively and analytically looking at what a tremendous embarrassment he is for the federal government. And I'm being kind. So let's look at, now, first, the thing to understand is Whitey Bulger, by all accounts, is a murderer, a gang leader, a vicious criminal, and I'm not going to be shedding a lot of tears for him. That being said, let's look at the history of Whitey Bulger as a criminal, okay? Whitey Bulger is arrested for robbing banks and goes to prison in Atlanta when he's 23 years old, or thereabouts. And what then happens? Well, I hope you're enjoying the Halloween soundtrack in the background. He then becomes a guinea pig for the CIA, who drugged him with massive doses of LSD and who knows whatever else as part of the MK Ultra program. This is a fact. The CIA used Whitey Bulger as a guinea pig for drugs. They haven't denied this. That's just the fact. They took a guy, quite possibly, who was a criminal, a thug, like a lot of violent criminals in the Massachusetts area, and they turned him into a psychotic super killer by putting him in this MK Ultra program. That's number one. Then he goes and does his criminal thing, goes to Alcatraz, and in spite of the fact, hello Frank Valenzuela, how are you? And in spite of the fact that he gets a 20-year prison sentence, only ends up serving 9. Okay, that happens. Then let's look at what happens once he continues his criminal enterprise. Thank you, Mike Wolf. This is your holiday. Oh, you're pretty handsome as well. Now, let's look at what happens as he's continuing his criminal enterprise and the leadership of the Sugar Hill Gang. Okay? He is aided by FBI agent John Connolly. In all likelihood, John Connolly either turned a blind eye or actually possibly gave him information because Whitey Bulger, a huge criminal, was providing the FBI with information about mafia leaders in the New England area, mostly the Patriarca family. This is part of that top echelon informant program. So understand what was happening here. The FBI knew Whitey Bulger was a criminal. They knew he was a violent criminal. They knew he was a killer. And they either turned a blind eye to it, or they may have actually given him information that helped him evade arrest. The FBI gave Whitey Bulger a pass on murder because he was willing to be an informant and help them take down other high-profile gangsters. So you have the CIA drugging Whitey Bulger in his 20s with massive doses of LSD as part of the MK Ultra program. Then, when he's older and a much more mature criminal, a much more dangerous criminal, and he's an adult running this huge criminal enterprise, now you have the FBI's turn to turn a blind eye to his misconduct. Both of those things, the MK Ultra program where the CIA treated these prisoners like guinea pigs, loading them up with drugs, and then two, the FBI, through their use of the top echelon informant program, are textbook examples of government incompetence, or, and I'd like to think it's incompetence because I don't want to think there are entities within the government that have this degree of evil intent, or it's an example of, if not incompetence, malicious intent. Then we see his trial, and we see vicious killers, including Kevin Weeks. We see them essentially go free, in spite of the fact that they're killers, and they're willing to testify against Whitey Bulger and say, yeah, Whitey participated in all those murders with me. Whitey told me to do it. So they get lucrative 6- and 7-figure book deals, and they get to keep a lot of their criminal proceeds, and they get to be free while Whitey Bulger goes to prison. So the Justice Department creates what, in my view, continues a moral hazard by sending a message to every killer out there and every criminal that as long as you're willing to rat on somebody that's a bigger name than you, you can go free, and you can be rich, and you could be famous, and you're not going to have to pay the price of your crimes. And I think that is a sad, sad statement. Thank you, Frank. This lapel pin is, of course, the American flag and the New York State flag. That's a sad, sad commentary on how the DOJ cuts deals with killers. Then, let's look at what happened yesterday. So, Whitey Bulger is murdered on his first day at this prison in West Virginia, in Hazleton. Now, they just so happened to send Whitey Bulger to Hazleton, which is one of the most violent, and by the way, kudos to Michelle McPhee for the scoop in breaking the story yesterday. It's one of the most violent prisons in the federal prison system. And in spite of the fact that Whitey is 89 years old, they send him to one of the most violent prisons, not a medical facility. He's had multiple heart attacks, I believe a couple of strokes, since being in prison over the last 5 years. They send him to Hazleton, one of the prisons that has the worst records in terms of violent crime and inmate-on-inmate abuse and a host of other violent incidents. That's where they send them, the Bureau of Prisons. And it just so happens that multiple people that are in prison because of Whitey Bulger cooperating against them with the federal government, they're in that same prison. Now, keep in mind, Whitey Bulger is supposed to be under protective custody. How did these prisoners, these inmates at Hazleton, gain access to Whitey Bulger his first day in prison if Whitey Bulger was under protective custody? How? In my view, clearly, the BOP has blood on its hands here. Either they failed to protect him adequately, or worse, this was their way of being rid of someone that embarrassed the federal government for a long time and that maybe had some information about this top echelon informant program and the MK Ultra program and did all sorts of things. So as you look at Whitey Bulger, it's easy to, it's not just a 1930s microphone, George. It's a spooky microphone that my mom gave me for Halloween. I left my my mask at the radio station, which is an Andrew Cuomo mask with him with a long nose like Pinocchio because he's always lying. But when you look at Whitey Bulger, it's easy to say, oh yeah, isn't that the guy they made all those movies about? It's easy to say, oh, isn't that the guy whose brother was the politician? When you look at Whitey Bulger is not only an example of a vicious criminal and a killer who it's probably for the best, not probably, it's certainly for the best, is no longer at large, but Whitey Bulger is an example of the government screwing things up, either because of their incompetence or because they intentionally did so. The CIA with the MK Ultra program, the FBI by giving him tips on how to evade being captured and essentially turning a blind eye while he's murdering people. The DOJ by cutting all these deals with people like Stephen Flemmi to allow them to get a get-out-of-jail-free card as long as they're willing to say Whitey did it. And then lastly, and most recently, the Bureau of Prisons by failing to protect this guy. As Whitey Bulger's lawyer himself said, J.W. Carney, the jury sentenced Whitey Bulger to life in prison, and the judge sentenced him to life in prison. With the BOP's incompetence, and I'm being kind here, incompetence by giving them the benefit of the doubt, what the BOP did with their incompetence in sending him to Hazleton and refusing to protect him adequately is they decided to give him the death penalty instead. The CIA, the FBI, the DOJ, and the BOP, they're all culpable. They're all culpable here. Keep that in mind as you look at the life and crimes of Whitey Bulger. Because as Whitey Bulger himself said recently in a letter to some high school students that were doing some sort of a history project, he wrote to them from prison and he said, if you want to get away with crime, I'm paraphrasing here, but he said something to the effect of, if you want to profit from crime and get away with it, the only way to do that is to go to law school. Very, very interesting words. Now, lest you think the case of Whitey Bulger is an isolated incident, do a little homework about Greg Scarpa. And it's very apropos that we discuss Greg Scarpa, which I'll save a lengthier commentary for another day, on Halloween. Because Greg Scarpa, his nickname was the Grim Reaper. He actually would sign notes KM. You know what the KM stood for? The Killing Machine. And he was able to get away with this and kill all these people because of an FBI agent. The person that was supposed to be protecting the public helped Greg Scarpa, Lindley DeVecchio, just like John Connolly may have helped Whitey Bulger. So I'm going to be spending some time on this on the radio Sunday. We may even do a special podcast with some experts who've known Whitey and followed Whitey for a long time. But there's more than meets the eye here. So I want to encourage you, go to that extra, dig a little deeper. Look at Whitey, not just for his crimes, but for what it represents in terms of the CIA, the DOJ, the BOP, and the FBI. Thanks. Happy Halloween, everybody. I'll see you on the radio.